For this video I thought I'd revisit another issue of the official UK Sega Saturn Magazine, and this time where it all began with issue number 1. So when this issue first hit the newsstands back in '95, it would have shipped inside of a plastic bag, inside of which was also contained this video cassette tape. Now this tape basically had some beta footage of the likes of Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally and Virtua Cop, games that were still in development for the Saturn at the time. Also on the videotape was some footage for Saturn games that were on store shelves, and there was also a very cool advert for the system on the tape as well. So yeah, it's a pretty nice little piece of Sega Saturn memorabilia. But just moving on to the magazine itself then, and we see here that the main cover story was on Virtua Fighter 2, which would go on to be a pretty significant release on the Saturn. Now other headline grabbers were Hang On GP 95 and also the first review of Mortal Kombat 2. So just to confirm then, this was issue number 1 with a date of November 1995. So just inside the front cover then you had an advert for the 32X port of Virtua Fighter. Now I've never played this game, but from what I believe it's actually quite a decent port to the system. So probably well worth checking out if you have a 32X. Moving on then to the contents pages. Now there weren't a great deal many previews in this issue. In fairness, the Saturn hadn't been available for very long in Europe anyway. Looking at the reviews then, again there was no real AAA standout titles reviewed, but there were still some very good games for Saturn owners to look forward to, such as Clockwork Knight 2, SimCity 2000, you had the review for Mortal Kombat 2 as well in there, along with Rayman. So moving across then and taking a look at some of the showcases and features. Well, of course the main story was on Virtua Fighter 2, but there was also showcases for Virtua Cop, Clockwork Knight 2 and Sega Rally. And there was also a very nice feature on the Saturn's video CD peripheral and also its Photo CD software. So yeah, a pretty decent range of contents in this issue. Next up then was a brief guide to the contents of the actual videotape. So as I mentioned earlier, there was footage for Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally and Virtua Cop. And again, this would have been footage of the games whilst they were still in development. Now you also had footage there for X-Men Children of the Atom, Clockwork Knight 2 and one of my personal favourites, Alien Trilogy. So again, a content-packed videotape as well. So next up, taking a look at the news section for this issue. Now this issue's news section was primarily dominated with news from the JAMA arcade show, which had took place in Tokyo of that year. Now at the show, Sega unveiled some big arcade games such as Fighting Vipers, a game which would later see a release on the Sega Saturn, a very good port as well at that. Also, Sega unveiled Virtua Cop 2. Now at this point, Virtua Cop, the first game, hadn't even been released on the Saturn, and already Sega were showing off Virtua Cop 2. Now as luck would have it, both games, Virtua Cop and Virtua Cop 2, would be released on the Saturn, and they're easily one of the highlights of the 32-bit generation. Excellent light gun games. Also, there was a small piece on Dragon Force, an RPG which saw a PAL release and is quite expensive actually on the PAL version nowadays. And also a little piece on Manx TT, which is an excellent motorbike game for the Sega Saturn as well. So moving on then, and there were some more big arcade game reveals by Sega. This time Virtual On, which is like a battle mech type game, a versus fighter. And again, this would see a release on the Sega Saturn as well. And some bread and butter stuff then for the Saturn, X-Men Children of the Atom. Again, what with this being a 2D versus fighter, the Saturn was able to pull off stuff like this with no trouble at all really. Just moving across then, and there were some nice little pieces on the Saturn's Netlink peripheral or device, and also a small little piece on Baku Baku Animal, which is one of my personal favourite puzzlers on the system. So moving on then, and some brief news pieces for the likes of Johnny Bazooka Tone and what looks like Mortal Kombat 3. A cool little piece on the Sega Nomad. And then a very cool advert here for some of the Saturn's peripherals. So here we see the video CD card, multi-tap arcade stick, backup RAM cartridge. So yeah, the dog's peripherals. And just wrapping up this month's news section then was some pieces on Marvel Superheroes by Capcom. Again, this would have been bread and butter stuff for the Saturn, what would it been a 2D versus fighter. So the next section of the magazine then was a look at some of the games in development for the system at the time. So here we have Hang On GP95. This doesn't really compare to Manx TT, to be honest, so if you have to pick one bike game, make sure it's Manx TT. I've never actually played this game, but it just doesn't seem to be a patch on Manx anyway. Across the way then is Guardian Heroes, which is a game that's held in very high regard on the Saturn. When I first started playing this game actually, I kind of failed to see what all the fuss was about, but it was only after some extended play that I began to appreciate just how good a game it actually is. Now the only problem with this title is that it's quite expensive on PAL release, certainly on eBay anyway. Fortunately it's available for download on Xbox Live and PSN, so that might be the route to go if the Saturn PAL version is too expensive. Also here then is a small little preview on F1, which a Formula 1 game, which is half decent. It's not too bad. It's kind of an arcade style racer. So then I look at some more games that were in development, such as Mansion of the Hidden Souls and Wing Arms, which is a title I picked up there towards the tail end of last year. It's actually not a bad game, although it does have some flaws. It's a little bit repetitive, and it doesn't have a save feature, or it doesn't seem to have anyway. Certainly I couldn't find it. So I mean, you can't actually save your high scores or your progress in the game, but it was quite fun to play regardless. Also a look at an RPG, Mysteria, which I think would eventually be released as Mysteria Realms of Lore. There was a small piece on Kenji Ino's and Warp's D, and also a little piece on another 2D versus fighter, Golden Axe the Jewel, which is actually not too bad. It can't really compare with the likes of Capcom's output on the Saturn, but it's not too bad all the same. So next up is a look at the arcade games of the day. This section was titled Coin Operated, and this month's arcade game featured was Indy 500. Now as far as I'm aware, this game never actually got ported to any home consoles, and it's a shame actually, because from the gameplay footage I checked out on it, you know, it seemed to have a decent sensation of speed, and it looked like it could have been a fairly nice port to the Saturn at the time. But yeah, I mean, Sega have a wealth of arcade games that they really need to revisit and maybe churn out on Xbox Live or PSN. But yeah, this is one of their, I suppose, less known and more interesting ones. So next up then is an advert for one of my all-time favourite games on the Saturn, Firestorm Thunderhawk 2. a very slick and polished title for its time, I thought. And then an ad for the Mega CD original. Now admittedly this advert isn't much to look at, but it lists off some facts about the game for its time. So here we have, it was the best-selling game of 1993, Sega Mega CD product of the year, bought by 80% of Mega CD owners. And over here we have some very high appraisals for the game itself from some of the various magazines of the day. So just taking a look at this one by Sega Zone. If you've got a Mega CD, you have two choices: buy Thunderhawk or sell the Mega CD. So next up then was the previews, some games that were up and coming for the Saturn. So here we have what a Tilt, it appears to be, what looks like a 3D pinball title. Now admittedly I'm not a fan of pinball games, so I can't really comment too much on this one. Next up was Deadly Skies. As far as I'm aware, this game never saw the light of day on the Saturn anyway. It may have been released on the PlayStation. It's a bit of a shame actually, as it looked half decent. Next up then was a preview for a game that certainly was released on the Saturn, and as I mentioned earlier, this is one of my personal favourites. It's Firestorm Thunderhawk 2. And yeah, as I said, I always found this to be very slick, very polished. I loved the gameplay in it, had an amazing soundtrack as well. Definitely one of the better PAL Saturn releases, I reckon. So then you had your obligatory letters pages and a Q&A section, and an advert here for some company selling games back then, Special Reserve. So next up then is the first of the big showcases, which is a look at Virtua Fighter 2. Now when the Saturn first launched, you would have had the likes of Virtua Fighter and Daytona USA as launch titles. Now as good as the gameplay was in those titles, as far as the graphics were concerned, they did look a bit ropey. And it didn't really help matters much for Sega when you looked at the PlayStation ports of Tekken and Ridge Racer, which in fairness looked significantly better. So I suppose there was a question mark there over the Saturn's ability to actually pull off convincing 3D graphics. But of course when Virtua Fighter 2 came along, it pretty much changed perception. Virtua Fighter 2 is easily one of the most technically accomplished games on the Saturn. It runs amazingly smoothly in the Saturn's high-res mode at a rock-solid 60 frames per second. This is one of those games I would have spent hours on when I first got it back in 1997, I think it was, when I actually picked it up. And yeah, I'd say it's one of the games that really dispelled the myth that the Saturn couldn't handle 3D. But yeah, I mean, it's an absolute excellent fighter for the system. It's pretty cheap to pick up nowadays as well, so well worth picking up if you haven't checked it out. So the next big showcase or feature was on Virtua Cop, the upcoming light gun game from Sega for the Saturn. And again, this is just another excellent game for the Saturn. Given the choice between this and Virtua Cop 2, admittedly I'd go for Virtua Cop 2, but this is still a lot of fun to play even today. Absolutely recommend to play this game using the Sega Stunner as well. You can use the joypad, but you lose a lot of the gameplay by doing so. Much more fun with the gun. The next big feature then was on Clockwork Knight 2, which is a very interesting looking 2D side-scrolling platformer from Sega. Again, it's a game I haven't actually yet played, but judging from the screenshots, it certainly looks pretty creative and imaginative. And now another big heavy hitter for the Sega Saturn, which was the release of Sega Rally. Easily one of the best racers, if not the best racer on the system. I mean, certainly of all the racers I've played on the Saturn, this one probably ranks as the best for me. You know, it's one of those games that I personally can come back to time and time again, and it's as playable today as it was all those years ago when I first played it. Again, it has excellent graphics and a superb soundtrack to it as well. And just the handling really makes the gameplay so enjoyable. But definitely, this was actually, I think it became the fastest selling Sega Saturn game in the UK when it was released. And deservedly so. It's an absolutely stunning racer on the Saturn. So next up here we have some, what appears to be some competition results. And a competition here to win £3,000 worth of a pinball machine. So now here's this interesting little feature on the Sega Saturn's video CD and photo CD peripherals. So essentially the video CD card allowed the Saturn to play VHS quality film and music CDs. Now it was a pretty short-lived format as far as I can remember. Video CDs, I don't think they took off that well. But I guess there's probably a niche today for collectors who might be interested in collecting them. And also as just some information on the Saturn's ability to develop photos as well. So a pretty little interesting feature on some of the Saturn's more obscure capabilities. So moving on then to the review section, and first up was a review for Clockwork Knight 2, which scored 88%. Fantastic graphics, great gameplay and a brilliant fairy tale story make Clockwork Knight 2 the most engrossing and entertaining Saturn platformer around. Next up, another solid score for SimCity 2000, which picked up 86%. And an even better score then for Theme Park, which was awarded 90%. So next up for review then was Street Fighter the Movie, which is a pretty infamous title, most noted for its poor gameplay and dodgy digitized graphics. So the magazine awarded it 49%, summing it up by saying, "A pointless waste of time and money on behalf of everyone involved, except the actors who got paid for doing it. Do not be conned." Next up for review then was NBA Jam Tournament Edition, which looks like a pretty decent basketball title actually. That picked up 89%. Another sort of obscure title here, Robotica, 70%. NHL Hockey. And then a review for the pretty nice looking platformer Rayman. Again, another sports game review, World Series Baseball. Not a title I don't think I'll be picking up anytime soon. And a pretty strong review then for Mortal Kombat 2, which picked up 93%. Pretty decent looking title there. So just getting to near the end of the magazine now, we're moving on to the 16-bit section, covering the likes of the Mega Drive, 32X and Mega CD. So this was a quick preview on International Superstar Soccer for the Mega Drive, which had been very successful on the Super Nintendo up until that point. And a look at Dark Side for the 32X. Some more Mega Drive reviews here now for Spot Goes to Hollywood and Micro Machines 96, Again, two good scorers here with 90% and 92% respectively. More Mega Drive reviews then. Vector Man is a pretty interesting platformer for the system. And then just finishing off then with a player's guide for Mortal Kombat 3 for the Saturn. And then a roundup of some of the titles that were already available for the Saturn back in 1995. So here we have Virtua Fighter Remix, which was an enhanced version over the first Virtua Fighter game. Essentially it added textures to the graphics. So the game looked a lot better, and a lot of the bugs and glitches were ironed out of the first release of the game. Also out then was the Tony USA, very playable if a little bit dodgy in the graphics department, and Bug, which was an interesting platformer for the Saturn. Then you had also available was Myst, Shinobi X, which I found to be a very playable game, and also out back then was the amazing Panzer Dragoon. And then here we have just a quick roundup of some of the various video and music CDs available for the Saturn's video CD peripheral. And then that pretty much wraps up the magazine. So yeah, that was issue number 1 then of the official UK Sega Saturn magazine. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone for watching, and a big thanks to all subscribers, and of course to all the friends here as well. So yeah, until the next video, take care.